Hello, team, and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce. This is a Ukraine war news update for the 4th of April. No, 4th of May 2023. May the 4th be with you, of course. And goodness, how did I forget? I've got a new book out today called Aliens and Religion Where Two Worlds Collide, assessing the impact of discovering extraterrestrial intelligence on religion and theology. So yeah, May the 4th, because Star Wars and all that. That's out today in paperback. It's out in a week in ebook. Go and grab it if you like that kind of geeky philosophy, bit of science. We do some science in there. Anyway, enough spamming my own videos. Right, let's go to actual news. We'll go to the normal starting place, which is Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. And there's some interesting figures on here. 650 liquidated personnel is an uptick. Remember all the usual caveats. Is an uptick for the figures of Russian troop losses. 5 tanks, slightly up from yesterday's one. I think it was 17 APCs. Something's happened somewhere on the front line, or in multiple places. So that is quite a heavy set of losses there. 16 artillery systems and 3 MLRS. That is a big number of both. So 3 MLRS. As you can see, the average number of MLRS lost over the entire conflict adds up to about 1 1/3, maybe, over the entire conflict, maybe 1 1/4. So 3 is at least double what we're used to, and 16 artillery systems is incredibly useful. I think we are seeing a real increase in activity for the Ukrainians ahead of the counteroffensive. Some are saying the counteroffensive has already started. It depends how you define a counteroffensive. Certainly, the shaping operations have started. They are shaping the battlefield. They are doing things like aiming explicitly for artillery systems and artillery pieces. They've been doing that for some time. So you could say they've been shaping the battlefield or shaping the theaters of conflict in certain areas ahead of the counteroffensive for some time. 4 anti-aircraft warfare systems is over 4 times what you normally get during in a day for this category. Anti-aircraft warfare systems are super important. Again, as I always say, it depends what it is. Is it an S-300 or is it an autocannon? We've got 4 here, so there's a chance that there's a bit of everything. That's, again, a very good number. 18 drones. There was a drone, saturation drone attack last night. 21 vehicles and fuel tanks. That is super high. 21, it's a very high number. There have been these attacks on fuel depots, and one might assume there are explicit attacks on trucks. I don't know, and other logistics vehicles. Now, 7 pieces of special equipment, less than 1 per day is the average. We have 7. That's going to be electronic warfare. That's going to be radar systems. So this is an incredibly important day for statistics, I think. We are starting to see more troops, but still way less than we have seen at the peak of the conflict. But it's these other figures that are super important, particularly artillery, anti-aircraft warfare, and special equipment. Really high. So the Ukrainians are definitely doing something. Okay, before I get onto the big topic of the drone attack on the Kremlin, let's talk about some other sort of hits and losses. There were 24 Iranian, up to 24 Iranian-made Shahed 136 and 131 drones attacking across Ukraine. 18 of them were shot down. Is that right? Where's that number? Yeah, but yes, 18 of those were shot down by the Air Force. So that's a fairly good interception rate. They would like it higher. Obviously, there have been some nights where 100% of them be shot down. So it'd be nice if that was the case. I don't know the damage that has been done to anywhere in Ukraine. I've not seen any news about the 6 that got through and what they were targeting. News came out yesterday that the division of the German Iris-T anti-aircraft missile system, they now have 2 of these, has destroyed more than 60 air targets since October last year. And was it the Iris-T that had a 100% hit rate as well? So these are super useful. But of course, if you're using really expensive missiles to take down things like Shahed drones, is there an asymmetry there that is not sustainable going forward? You need to be taking out things like Shaheds with low-tech stuff, and you need to be taking out missile launchers before they are able to shoot their missiles. That is the most efficient way of doing warfare in that context. Right, Russian-controlled Mosperna in Donetsk region, about 25 kilometers southeast of Donetsk city. So Donetsk city is a large city to the east of Avdiivka. So 25 kilometers southeast of there, as reportedly an ammunition depot was targeted. Big explosion there. This is a huge explosion. Not seen any other talk about this, so I presume this was from yesterday, and it is what it says it is. Tim White says a video of a huge strike on what's said to be a Russian camp in Zaporizhzhia Oblast. Meanwhile, Wagner Kaiser Prigozhin says the Ukrainian counteroffensive is underway. What a day this is turning out to be, says Tim White. It was quite a day yesterday for a whole bunch of different reasons. But that is a significant blast. If that is a Russian camp, and we have seen an uptick in soldiers lost yesterday, then that might have something to do with it. I don't know what the details of that are, however. Russian sources report that Alchevsk, which is sort of near Holivka, in up towards well, it is in Luhansk region, behind I think sort of Lysychansk, Severodonetsk, Rubizhne area. Russian-controlled Luhansk region came under fire with HIMARS missiles last night. So HIMARS are very active. And then another big oil refinery explosion or big fire. This is in Krasnodar, which is again where another oil refinery that was closer to the Kerch Strait, the Kerch Bridge, was hit yesterday, and in Taman. This was a different one that was hit last night with drone, authorities say. So tonight, 2 oil refineries were on fire in the Krasnodar territory and the Rostov region. So the district says 2 were on fire, and gives footage. Says Krasnodar Krai oil refinery is there. So that's the your Kerch Bridge there. And yesterday, the one that was hit was here. This one's further inland. And then there's another sort of forest fire here. Yet another village in Sverdlovsk region is under threat. This time, residents of Sankino complain no advanced safety work was carried out, and many small fires threaten their homes. Temperatures have soared in recent days, adding to fire risk. As I've mentioned before, this is partly because the people who usually work doing fire safety and clearing, making fire breaks and sorting out wildfires are the conscripts that are conscripted on an annual basis, and this is part of the work they would do as part of their conscription. They are obviously doing training for being in war, and then arguably being placed somewhere in the conflict zone and not doing work like this. So you will see fires like this going out of control. You'll see far more wildfires, I think, this year than you've seen in years before the war. This is a problem. Right. Okay, we're going to go on to the biggest piece of news yesterday, which gets its own sort of tab thread, and that was this. So almost all of you will have seen this. You actually got people, I think, going up. This is at the Kremlin or in the Red Square, and you got a drone. There are apparently 2 drones, I think, but this drone hits a flagpole. It doesn't even hit the flagpole; it explodes over it, which is interesting. As you look at there, bang! It explodes. It looks like a remote detonation rather than an impact detonation. So Philip O'Brien says, don't know what to make of this, but if it was the Ukrainians, it was almost certainly not an attack aimed at Putin unless he sleeps completely exposed in the roof. Imagine if it was the Ukrainians. It was a psychological ploy to destabilize the Russians. Now, everyone is talking about, like, what was the intention here? Who did it and why? Philip O'Brien says it could be a Russian operation to make Ukraine look reckless, either to weaken Western support or try to shore up Russian domestic support. Lots of different theories going around. If it was a Ukrainian operation, it would certainly be a departure. Normally, they are focused on hitting militarily focused targets that can damage the Russian war effort. This would be an attack to have some political effect, but it would be out of character. I'm going to get on to discussing that in a second. Let's just look at a few more bits of footage. There, the roof appears to be on fire a little bit. Putin's press service claims 2 drones in the Kiev regime targeted the Kremlin last night, but were disabled by electronic warfare and caused no damage. Putin's press service sees terrorism and a Putin assassination attempt in the allegedly Ukrainian drone attack on the Kremlin and promises retaliation. Despite Kremlin allegations, it remains unclear what exactly happened. For instance, with Moscow oversaturated with air defense systems, it is possible that one of them attempted to shoot down a quadcopter, launched a film footage of Moscow with a missile hitting the rooftop. Mikhailo Podolyak, advisor to the head of the presidential office, says Ukraine has not attacked the Kremlin or any other facilities on the Russian territory. And then another video here of the attack, and you see it exploding off there to the left. President Zelenskyy, who was in Finland, said, "We do not attack Putin or Moscow. We fight on our territory. We're defending our villages and cities. We didn't attack Putin. We leave it to the tribunal." While Russia claimed Ukraine launched a drone strike in an attempt to kill Russian President Putin, CNN analysis of a video that confirmed 2 drones flew above the Kremlin found no evidence of Ukrainian involvement. Whatever the provenance of the 2 drones that approached the Kremlin early Wednesday morning, one thing was clear: the Russian government wanted the world to know about them. That's an interesting conclusion. So, talking about this again, so Mark Galliotti says, obviously, the Kremlin drone story is still very much a breaking one, but people should really stop talking about this as an attempted assassination attempt against Putin. That's just playing to Kremlin talking points. He notoriously rarely goes to the Kremlin, let alone stays there overnight. And there was no scheduled early morning meetings or the like there, which might make one assume he might be in his palatial flat there. Besides, this is, I understand, quite well protected, not quite a bunker, but something that would be hard to hit by anything unable to make some sharp turns, which would make it vulnerable. So instead, if we presume it was a Ukrainian attack, consider it a performative strike, a demonstration of capability and a declaration of intent. Don't think Moscow is safe. That is, after all, a clear message. What is less clear is whether it shakes Russians' nerve or angers them. We'll have to see, and what Washington thinks, given that it seems to have been trying to get Kyiv to abandon, not step up, its attacks deep into Russia. All of these ideas, what we do know is that Margarita Simonyan, the Russian propagandist and head of RT, said maybe now it will start for real. So this is her excuse to really start the war on Ukraine, which I don't know what that would entail, nuclear weapons possibly. And in fact, there have been all sorts of reactions from parliamentarians, propagandists, really whipping up and inciting rage against Ukraine. And there is, well, okay, before I get into a little bit more analysis, what happened yesterday, I don't know if this is related, but it appears like Kherson was targeted absolutely harshly. It says 12 people killed. Actually, it's 23 people, I think is the latest number. 48 injured in a totally barbaric attack on Kherson, on like supermarkets, trains. It was horrible. No one died in Moscow, and Russia said no property was damaged. Russia killed 19, actually 23 civilians in Kherson today and counting. They targeted a grocery store. There's a real asymmetry there. Tim White says, so a small drone that couldn't carry enough explosive to do any real damage to the Kremlin or anyone inside unleashes a torrent of vitriol and screams of terrorism and Nazism. Yet in Kherson, the death toll from a pure terrorist attack on a supermarket is now 17 with 20 plus injured. And there's all sorts of, horrific footage of what's happened in Kherson all day long. Russia have been chaotically bombarding Kherson with artillery and MLRS. Russians are doing the only thing they are good at: bombing supermarket shopping centers. This is one of the darkest days in Kherson. So far, it's known that 16 civilians were killed, 28 wounded. As I said, that's now 23 wounded, 46, I think, or 48 injured, and probably more than that now. I was going to do part of my extra yesterday on Kherson getting hit with this kind of attack, and I was going to talk about, is this liberation? Right, this didn't happen to Kherson when the Russians were in Kherson and the Ukrainians were trying to take it back. They didn't lob munitions randomly into a civilian city, right? They didn't do that. They liberated Kherson, And now the Russians are indiscriminately bombing. I've seen footage over the months of people here waiting at bus stops, just horrific stuff, right? And you're thinking, is this liberation? Again, I'm going to have a rant about Russian morality here. Like, aside from Putin and the Kremlin, is this really what you do when you're trying to liberate a country and win the hearts and minds of that country? Is indiscriminately kill their citizens? And the ones you don't kill, you say you have to have a Russian passport and you can't leave here and you can't say this. And that kid that said, no, we're for the Ukrainians has now had to publicly apologize. He's not allowed to hold his own views. He has to hold the views of in line with the autocratic regime. Is this liberation? Liberation, freedom. You're not even free to think and believe what you want or say what you want. You're not free to go where you want without being you're not even free to say I'm Ukrainian. You have to say I'm Russian if you want any kind of liberty. It's just absolutely absurd. The whole project that Russia, this whole project is a terrorist project, is an autocratic, anti-liberty project. And any Russian voice in the threads today needs to explain how this is acceptable. You need to explain how it's acceptable. It's not acceptable. You are committing war crimes. You are committing to an invasion of a sovereign nation. And don't go, but what about the Donbass? It's a pathetic excuse. This is not acceptable. Okay, rant over. So, but I could continue. Russia fires at a passenger train about to leave Kherson, according to Ukrainian officials. A conductor was wounded and after a carriage was hit in the station. Thankfully, the 116 passengers were not on board because of the air raid sirens. The train departed only 14 minutes late. Now, Shashant Joshi says, okay, so the ISW Institute for the Study of War American military think tank has said that Russia likely staged this attack. And he says, I disagree. And myself, I don't know. I can see arguments both sides, but let's see what Shashant Joshi says, defense correspondent for the Economist. He says the BBC just pointed out that Russian state television didn't use videos or picture of the Kremlin attack. They used file footage instead. Why plot a false flag operation only to keep it under wraps for 12 hours and then fail to air the images? This is interesting. This didn't come out. This came out yesterday, quite long after it happened in the evening or, the night before. So that's interesting. Why did Russia leave it? If it was like, if they were, but then you could argue, well, actually, that fits more into them like planning this, or maybe it doesn't, because as Shashant Joshi said, why would you leave it if you're absolutely, if you plan this and you want the world to know that what Ukraine has just done, you need to shout about it straight away. And so, was that wait? Does that better support the hypothesis that it was a false flag operation, or that Ukraine genuinely did it? And actually, you can find rationale for both, and that's a problem. That's where I'm at. It's like, there's no clear cut. There's no clear cut evidence both ways, where it's clearly one side's done it and the other side hasn't. However, my opinion is that this activity will galvanize Russian popular support for Putin. If you feel you're being attacked, you will entrench and you will get defensive and you will see whoever's doing that as the enemy. So I don't think this helps. I think this helps Russia more than Ukraine. But I'm still kind of like, I don't know. I think it helps Russia more than Ukraine, because I think Russia can now have permission to do a load of stuff that maybe they weren't able to do. And look at the timing of this. This is just as the counteroffensive is about to ramp up. Russia are looking like they're going to be on the end of some serious trouble from this counteroffensive. And suddenly this happens. Does this allow them to use the kind of force that they were shying away from using? Does it allow them to get more sympathy from domestic audience, but also from some international players as well? I don't know. I just don't know. But I think I slightly favour it being a false flag. However, people throw false flag accusations around all the time, and it's a really common thing to say. And I don't know. I just don't know how common false flag operations are. But then actually, when you look back at the history of Russia with bombings in and the whole kind of Chechnya thing, with and then the theater bombings, and we know that they do this kind of thing. So I'm still left, as you can tell now, I'm still left just I don't know. I just don't know. Anyway, more commentary. Russia likely staged this attack. This is referring to the ISW in an attempt to bring the war home to a Russian domestic audience and set conditions for a wider societal mobilization. That's a really important point. So not only does it galvanize your population, they are then more likely to volunteer for the war effort, and we know that their advertising at the moment is falling short of getting the volunteers they were wanting, which is like 400,000. Never going to get that, but also uh, will give them permission to do possibly a proper mobilization in a way that the nation might not then complain so much about, because the Kremlin's being attacked, our own capital city's being attacked. Yeah, it's a couple of flimsy drones. Now, what I would have to say as well is those drones don't look big enough to be drones that have been sent from Ukraine. They've been sent internally from Russia. I doubt they've got the range to get from Ukraine to Russia, given how small they were. They didn't look massive, but I don't know. It's difficult to work out how big they were, to be honest, from that footage. But they didn't seem like the biggest drones, and therefore does that mean they're more likely to be set up within Russia? And does that mean it's then possibly pro-Ukrainian uh, actors within Russia, but not necessarily the Ukrainian government themselves? Are these Russian oligarchs doing something funky? Are they? Do you know what I mean? Like again, that there are just so many options here. Russian authorities, Flash News continues, saying, have recently taken steps to increase air defense capabilities, and it is therefore unlikely that two drones could have penetrated multiple layers of air defense and detonated over the Kremlin in a way that provided spectacular imagery caught nicely on camera. Again, good points. And Michael Clark says, I thought yesterday that I'd be truly astonished if Kyiv was behind this drone attack. Monumentally stupid if it was. And this is what I think. I just think it doesn't work in their favor to do this. And this excellent forensic thread strengthens my conviction. It was no more than a fireworks stunt by somebody. We can only guess who till more information comes. So Geo confirmed and said, Russia, two drones tried to attack the Kremlin, residence of Vladimir Putin, and were shot down. This is an assassination attempt on President Putin before Victory Day. Before we start this thread, a reminder that Russia had placed different anti-aircraft systems in Moscow. And I've reported on this before. They cleaned some trees away from the side of the river. They put a bunch of stuff on roofs, all sorts of shenanigans going on with air defenses around Moscow, in and around Moscow. Then all the footage here, geolocation, drone flying roughly from the east direction, exploding when it passed the flag, trajectory of the drone. Based on the position of the moon, we can assess this happened between 1:30 and 3:30 local time. Geolocation for video 2, what seems to be the remnants of the drone burning on the roof, as you can see there. Geolocation of video 3. So this is all like good old open source intelligence work. A drone crashes from left to right on the dome from the western direction. Video 5. So there's lots of bits of video that is used for the geolocation, and this allows triangulation. This should be the most protected area of Moscow with all the air defense. So above the Senatsky Dvorets Senate Palace part of the Kremlin. And of course, it has to pass over Moscow to get there successfully. What is the Senate Palace? Currently, it houses a Russian presidential administration and is a highly secured and restricted area closed to the public. So what happened? Thanks to another source, his remark, we are able to get an insight into what happened. The drone attack around 2:27 local time from the west, drone attack 2 from 2:43 local time from the east. So you've got one coming from one direction, one coming from the other direction. Dome 1 crashed on the dome, the other one coming from the opposite direction exploded above the dome. It is possible that the dome itself was the target. So, video 5 and 3 were from the first drones, the burning drone, 227 drone a drone crashed on the dome of the Senate Palace. People heard the sound and started looking and filming in the direction where the drone was burning. When a second drone was flying towards the dome, minimum 15 minutes later, people were already awake and filming. This is video 2 of 4. Is the footage made by filming a CCTV feed? It's likely a kitchen and not CCTV. The reflection is caused by a mirror effect in the window based on one of the point of views. Some footage is possibly made from inside a hotel. Uh, but what with the people climbing on the dome? Based on triangulation, the burning drone was on the other side. So they were climbing toward the burning drone while a second drone attack occurred. So that first one where we see it burning in another footage is actually already burning on the other side, but probably has burnt itself out or whatnot. You can see some smoke there before this other drone then explodes above the dome. Are the two persons hit by the shrapnel? Based on the fact that the drone exploded after it passed the flag, the dome could have given enough cover against the shrapnel flying the remnants of the drone. Conclusion: it's highly likely, based on the footage, that two drones penetrated the Moscow air defense and exploded above the Senate Palace in the Kremlin, what should be the most protected area in Moscow and even in Russia. This is a huge humiliation for Russia. Why was this drone able to penetrate so deep into the Kremlin area? Was it a humiliation strike directed at the dome of the Senate Palace in the Kremlin? Who was a benefactor? Ukraine, internal struggle, or false flag? So there you go. I mean, you make up your own conclusions to that. Again, I'm left thinking, I just don't know. My firm conclusion is this doesn't benefit Ukraine. And given it doesn't benefit Ukraine, I would be slightly surprised if Ukraine actually were behind this. At least the government, the administration. I think they would be better off hitting military targets around Moscow. That makes a lot of sense, which is equally humiliating in the sense of, like, we can hit your targets here in Moscow, in around Moscow. This is your capital city, and we're hitting military targets. But you start hitting somewhere like the Kremlin, you are going to get the people up in anger about that. And I don't think that will work in Ukraine's favor, but it does work in Russia's favor. Okay, moving on to other things. This is bits and bobs. Meet the Belarusians who tricked Russia into firing on its own men. I just did just a little bit from this Politico news article that I thought was interesting, which is this is a Belarusian who is fighting for the Ukrainians. After we overran a trench, the commander used a radio we found, pretended to be a Russian, and gave false coordinates for a Russian fire mission, explained Pavel Shermay, a 46-year-old former Olympic rower who's been fighting for Ukraine. And it worked, chimed in a 25-year-old volunteer with a rueful smile. So there are these things, and I'm sure it happens on both sides, but here we've got Belarusians for the Ukrainians pretending to be Russian, calling in artillery strike on Russian positions from the Russian artillery, and they did it. And we have heard lots of, I've seen video footage of claims of friendly fire from the Russians. We know the friendly fire is a big problem with the Russians, but it could be that sometimes it's been orchestrated by the Ukrainians. Okay, the Russian military placed military equipment and explosives in the turbine section of the fourth power unit of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. This was reported by the State Inspectorate for Nuclear Regulation of Ukraine. It is noted that this became known during the weekly meeting on the communication between the crisis center, the IAEA, and the State Nuclear Regulatory Commission on the activities of the IAEA mission at the site of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. So it all looks pretty above board that this is what has happened. Just incredibly dodgy that the Russians have placed explosives in the nuclear power plant. I mean, gee whiz. There's so much you could say just about that. I mean, we know that they are putting defenses in and around the nuclear power plant. This will be a very dodgy place to try and approach an attack. We already know that back in October or November last year, Ukrainians tried to storm the nuclear power station area across the reservoir by boat, and it failed because it is so well defended. So there is a lot of equipment around there as it stands. Right, Kenneth Gregg, who's a Swedish fighter in in Ukraine fighting. Just some news from him. I wanted to just talk about a couple of things really quickly. One is that he said he's been unable to speak for. So we have been asked to report with a 48 to 72 hours delay. Now, I mean, that's almost the most important thing I'm going to tell you that he said. That is an indication that operational security is taking place and that they are doing things. So now you're going to start seeing, I think, real ramping up of activity concerning the counteroffensive. Doesn't mean it's necessarily started, like the vanguards or whatever are moving, the tanks are moving, but there is going to be an awful lot of activity that is softening targets, that is shaping the battlefield, so on and so forth. He said in Bakhmut, the advance of the Russians has been stopped. They are suffering huge losses there right now. Of course, take his claims with a pinch of salt. And he says this is a new trend. So he says other front lines are as before. The new trend, which has now lasted 3 days, is that the Russians' reserves have once again run out. It's unlikely that Wagner's master chef, that's Prigozhin, would get more reinforcements as the Russians are waiting for our major offensive to begin. They need people in other places too, not just Bakhmut. So I find that's an interesting observation there. Okay, moving on to military aid and similar. The US, fantastic. I mean, goodness me, if it wasn't for the US, Ukraine would be in a lot of trouble. I mean, the amount of stuff they've given, yes, it might not be as high as a percentage of GDP than the Baltics, but then they're much smaller countries giving a much smaller amount of aid. Just in real terms, the US are phenomenally important. $300 million in additional security assistance. That includes HIMARS artillery ammunition, howitzer ammunition, mortar ammunition, Carl Gustav 84 and Carl Gustav anti-armor weapon systems. Hydra 70, these are precision guided rockets used to that can take out drones and whatnot. Small arms and small arms ammunition, demolition munitions for obstacle clearing, trucks and trailers and transport equipment, testing diagnostic equipment to support vehicle maintenance and repair, and spare parts for other field equipment. So fantastic. Good stuff, US. Speaking of which, I had someone that's been a really great supporter of the channel for the last kind of couple of weeks has come on board, and then this morning said, "You've lost a subscriber. You're being too critical of the US." And it was in my video yesterday, and I was like, and I went through the video and I listened and I watched it all. And the only thing I said about the US was that Jack Teixeira leaking of all those documents was embarrassing for the US military administration, embarrassing for the US. And I was like, that's uncontroversial. I mean, it was. If you've got a 21-year-old, airman, really low down, being able to leak that information online, that has set back. We know it's embarrassing because they were scrabbling to sort that out and work out what happened and make sure it doesn't happen again. And now we had yesterday, because I was reporting that yesterday, the Ukrainians said we're not sharing information on what we're doing in our counteroffensives, and there are some theorizing that that might be as a result of information being leaked too easily. And there are plenty of articles out there saying, literally with the headline, the leak is embarrassing for the US, and so on and so forth. So I will criticize where I criticize, and sometimes I will criticize the US, and other times, like now, I will be really positive about the US because without the US, Ukraine's screwed, right? So in the Biden administration, you might say they were maybe a little bit slow to begin with, maybe they haven't given planes, but that's not the Biden. That is actually the military who will be deciding that. But they're giving like loads of stuff. They're doing an amazing job to support Ukraine. So, but I will criticize where I'm not going to not say something because I'm afraid to say it because someone might get upset. I will say what I think is the truth. What I prefer is you say where I'm wrong rather than just say, right, I'm unsubscribing. It's tell me where I'm wrong and why I'm wrong. But I'll criticize the US. I'll criticize the UK. I'll criticize anyone if I think it's warranted. Goodness me, I can criticize the UK. I could criticize the UK today. We've got local elections today, and we've brought in a voter ID rule. So you had to have photo ID. You might say, yeah, fair enough. Okay, fair enough. You have to have photo ID to vote in the local elections now. Never used to have that. Old people are allowed to use bus passes. Young people, not allowed to use bus passes. Why would you have that double standards? I'll tell you why, because old people are more likely to vote Conservative and young people are more likely not to vote Conservative. So you can use that ID to vote, but young people can't. So what does that do? It makes it slightly harder for young people to vote. Why? Because they're less likely to vote for the government that's in charge. Okay, there you go. So there's criticism of my government. I can criticize the UK for a long time if you like. I will criticize anyone. Just, yeah. During a visit to Finland, Zelenskyy said he is confident of receiving Western fighter jets. This is huge, but it could just be talking it up. Yeah, I'm confident we're going to get them. Reznikov has said this before. Does it mean he's going to get them? No, not at all. However, Denmark has hinted that Ukraine may get F-16 fighter jets. Head of the Danish government has said this is a difficult task, but the discussion is ongoing. From the Danish side, we have not yet closed the issue. Whoa, that would be amazing if that could happen. Norway has allocated, so with Zelensky being in Finland, he's met with all the Nordic states, I believe. Norway's allocated 378 million euros of aid to Ukraine. That will be spent on humanitarian needs, and another 235 million will be spent on humanitarian, 143 on budget support and the rehabilitation of damaged infrastructure. So it's not necessarily a military aid one, that is humanitarian and structural. Missiles with up to 300 kilometers reach for Ukraine. The UK, Norway, Netherlands, Denmark, and Sweden participate in a fund called IFU, International Fund for Ukraine. The fund has started procurement of high-end weapons, amongst which missiles that have reached up to 300 kilometers. I talked to you the other day about them putting out a almost like a job advert for these missiles. It is basically a sort of tender for long-range missiles with the desired specifications and essential specifications. 14.5 millimeter anti-drone ZSU MP2 Victors transferred by Czech Republic somewhere on the roads in Ukraine. Now, here is these are essentially technicals that are, and there are quite a few of them as well. As you can see on these kind of Hiluxes or whatever they are, these big cannons, 14.5 mil cannons, fantastic. Good stuff. They'll need everything they can get their hands on. US donated M109A6 Paladin 155mm self-propelled howitzers are already in Ukraine. The US has pledged over 18 of these to the Ukrainian army. They are there. Excellent. Ukraine received the first batch of demining equipment from Canada, according to the Canadian Embassy in Ukraine. The equipment is worth over $16 million, which includes vehicles to clear farmland. This will help Ukraine achieve food security. Fantastic. Thank you, Canada. And the EU will supply Ukraine with 1 million artillery shells over the next 12 months. The European Commission has allocated 500 million euros for the urgent strengthening of the potential of the EU defence industry, the press service of the EC has said. So both of this, fantastic. I mean, there is already talk that there is artillery flooding into Ukraine. I think I saw somewhere, have I got this one? No, someone was saying it is already flooding into Ukraine, ammunition. Now, I don't know whether that's overcooking it or if that's accurate, and if it is, that's fantastic. New Zealand has confirmed aid to Ukraine. It will allocate $3.1 million to humanitarian initiatives for Ukraine and increase the deployment of 95 instructors who train Ukrainian troops in the UK for a year. New Zealand will also introduce new sanctions against certain Russian companies and individuals. Fantastic. On the other hand, we've seen a column of tanks. I haven't seen them, although I am seeing them now. If this is accurate, as in sometimes these videos are from previous times. A column of tanks spotted trundling through Perm. Presumably, these trains are taking them to the front. I'd just like to know what tanks they are. I don't know. Can't quite see there. I wonder if anyone can help me on that one. Okay, fascinating. More Ukrainian innovation in their adaptation battle against the Russians. So this is using Steam Decks to control machine gun turrets. These are basically using gaming consoles to control turrets to be used a bit like in Aliens, the second film. I've referenced that before. They have those automatic turrets that fire at the aliens. This is basically what these are. Automatic turrets. Holy cow. Sorry about that. Yeah. My advice is don't stand too close to them. They're quite loud.
Yeah.
So they can use these kind of gaming consoles to fire these machine guns. And there you go. So that is innovation. That's a future of warfare, I guess. Autonomous system. Well, it's not autonomous actually, but it is remotely controlled. Okay, geopolitics. I've been speaking way too long. President of Ukraine, Zelenskyy, and his delegation have visited, as you know, Finland. Um, they they are also he's also visiting The Hague today. I did have that set up for The Hague. There it is. Zelenskyy to have a meeting at the ICC in The Hague. So he's in the Netherlands today. And interesting stuff here. I want to read that out, but I don't have time. It's about Kherson things. Actually, I will say there is a curfew in Kherson, and the reason why there's a curfew is because one presumes they are doing some activity. It's so where does it say? It talks about it. Yeah. Anyway, yeah, strict curfew, weekend long curfew that starts tomorrow night. If people are going out, it's to stock up on food and water. And he says that not even though the curfew doesn't start until tomorrow evening, most people have decided to stay at home. It's really scary to go outside, but it's also really scary at home. So it's all happening around there. It was somewhere else I saw that it was like, yeah, we think the curfew might be for our safety, but we think it's actually for the counteroffensive. So actually, local people thinking, yeah, okay, the counteroffensive is going to include possibly Kherson and Dnipro River. Anyway, Zelensky will reportedly visit Germany on May the 13th, and the invitation of Scholz. So this has got out. As a result, President Zelensky may cancel a planned trip to Germany because details have been leaked to the media. The leader was due to arrive on the 13th of May. It will probably still happen, but just a different date and itinerary. That has happened before. I can't remember which country it was, but it got leaked out before that he was visiting somewhere and he just changed the time and place, if I remember correctly, because obviously his security is of paramount importance. A court in Belarus has sentenced a former editor in chief of the Next, a Telegram channel, which is an important kind of news channel. I use some of their stuff on Twitter. Roman Prostevich to 8 years in prison. The Belarusian state news agency reports he was accused of conspiracy to seize power. Two other defendants, Jan Rudzik and Stepan Petillo, were sentenced to 19 and 20 years in prison, respectively. They are outside of Belarus. Only Protasevich was present at the meeting. Again, this is a way of curtailing press freedom, sort of things we see in Russia as well. There's just no freedom of speech, and these are all authoritarian states. There's no two ways about it. And finally, plundering continues unabated. Russian bulker Mikhail Nenashev, which is pictured, part of a Russian government-run smuggling operation that has used falsified manifests and seaborne subterfuge to steal Ukrainian grain, transits Bosphorus en route to occupied Sevastopol after delivering 27,200 tons of stolen wheat to Syria. That is still happening, and that somehow needs to stop, that stealing of that grain. But that's all about taking back the territories. Anyway, thank you for watching. That was a really long one today. That was the analysis of the Kremlin as well thrown in, the Kremlin drones. Thank you for watching. Take care, and I will speak to you later.